All right, guys, it's time for the Next Level Guy Show, a men's interview, interest, and improvement-focused podcast featuring interviews with the greats from all industries to help you better your life. Each week, a new episode features an interview with one of the greats, covering all aspects of their story, from life hacks to tips and protocols that have allowed them to live life on the next level. We then highlight concrete action steps that you can use to improve your life. And now, your host, Ian Dawson McKay.
And today's guest is Rob Biernacki. Rob is head instructor of Island Top Team, creator of Submission Formula BJJ Formula, Modern Leglock Formula, purveyor of the Rob Biernacki Online Academy, a master of Conceptual Jiu-Jitsu, and occasional Masters competitor. And in this interview, we discuss Conceptual BJJ, the use of mini battles to develop your skills and chances to improve, how each area of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu can be singled out and worked on by following a blue to brown progression path, how you can improve on your BJJ ability as a performer faster, the use of the scientific method in learning, and so much more. To find out more about Rob, you can follow his BJJ Academy website at https://islandtopteam.com. Follow Island Top Team on Facebook, Instagram and YouTube, as well as bjjconcepts.com. And now, let's get to the interview. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Rob. I've been a major fan of yours for years now, since I found you through Stephen Keston. But for those few people under a rock who've maybe not heard the name or your principle-based jiu-jitsu, how would you describe who you are and why you're becoming a legend in the sport?
Oh goodness, that is a far too flattering introduction. I would say I'm far from a legend. I'm just a nerd who talks about conceptual jiu-jitsu. That's what people know me for. I'm as far as the sport of jiu-jitsu, I'm an occasional masters competitor. That's the extent of it. My impact on the sport has been entirely created by the teaching method that I've developed and the online instruction that's available, whether it's through my site, which is bjjconcepts.net or .com, either one will get you there, or the work that I've done with Stephen Kesting, which is probably what I'm most well known for. Like if anybody has seen me, they've seen me on YouTube in a video with Stephen Kesting, most likely. Some of our videos have, I don't know, like 100,000 views or whatever, which is, nothing in the world of the internet, but for jiu-jitsu, it's pretty good. So I like to say that I'm very slightly jiu-jitsu internet famous, and that's the extent of my legend status.
It's better than being famous for a lot of things on the internet. You could be famous for TikTok.
Oh, fuck's sake. Yeah, fair enough.
When I see that stuff, I think we're going the right way of doing this kind of stuff. But I mean, that's why when I found your stuff, I thought, oh, here we go, another guy just talking about jiu-jitsu. But I never heard some of the concepts you talked about. I'm a blue belt in jiu-jitsu through Gracie Barra, and I've been taught moves and some chains and some very basic sort of concepts. Never had I been told about levers and wedges and, there was a wee bit about posture, but that was more basically pull their head down. It didn't really go into the depth that you did. But so just to sort of begin with, could you give a quick overview of the various concepts? I know you're probably sick of discussing these, but these were groundbreaking to me. And I know this is going to blow people away who are listening, who have never heard this, especially in sort of common jiu-jitsu settings.
The basic concept that I use is the concept of alignment. That is kind of a catch-all term that it's meant to identify how you position your body to generate force. One of the things that I always hesitate to take too much credit for anything that I've done with instruction and changing anything in the jiu-jitsu sphere. It's just I was lucky enough, I guess, to be involved in a sport where the level of coaching and instruction is in its infancy. All I really do is try to apply the same level of, scientific rigor and pedagogy methodology and coaching methodology and all that that you see in other sports, even other combat sports, that don't really exist yet in jiu-jitsu. So like if you were to do a sport that's fairly well developed, whether it's, you know, in combat sports, whether we're talking about boxing, which has been at a professional level for, you know, well over 100 years, even wrestling, which has been at a, you know, Olympic and collegiate level for probably a similar length of time, and then, you know, just other professional sports like you know, football, hockey, whatever. There's a tremendous amount of just proper coaching. Like the coaches are very well educated in sports science and pedagogy. That doesn't really exist in jiu-jitsu. So when I talk about alignment, like every sport that we do, there's an optimal way to move your body to generate force. And in most sports, that has been heavily researched and it's been sussed out, you know, empirically due to high-level competition for many, many decades. And again, that just doesn't exist in jiu-jitsu. So to take something like the positioning of our body, which again, you use the term posture. Posture is a very common term in jiu-jitsu, usually very vaguely defined. Structure is another term in jiu-jitsu, vaguely defined, and base is another term in jiu-jitsu, again, vaguely defined. So what I've just tried to do is give those three things, base, posture, and structure, very specific definitions that allow people to better understand what they need to be doing with their bodies at all times to be as physically effective as they can be. Whatever your potential for generating force is, if you have good alignment, you can actuate that potential. And if you don't have good alignment, it doesn't really matter how many moves you know. Like this is the big, I would say, flaw in the way jiu-jitsu is taught is it is taught as a collection of techniques or moves. And it's impossible for most people to learn to any high level by just randomly memorizing and applying moves. However, it's not impossible for really good athletes or for people who are unbelievably dedicated and are just going to train endlessly. Like, despite the, let's face it, bad instruction that's generally used in jiu-jitsu, like the bad instruction methodology, people still get quite good at it. And that's just a testament to people who are insanely dedicated or, you know, genetic freaks. But for the average person who's just doing this because they want to do a cool hobby, that level of instruction is so suboptimal that it results in practitioners who've been training for half a decade and they're still pretty shit at something that is honestly really cool and a lot of fun to be good at. So if I've done anything to contribute to the sport, it's to try to push forward the notion that a lot of the coaching methods we use are antiquated. The ways that we describe jiu-jitsu, the ways that we communicate jiu-jitsu, which is as a random collection of techniques, is wholly inadequate, both for elite practitioners, but especially for hobbyists. If you're just, you know, an average person, you will benefit tremendously from receiving actual proper like coaching that up until probably pretty recently, and still pretty pervasively lacking, but up until pretty recently, you would not have access to high-level coaching in jiu-jitsu unless you were an elite athlete and at one of the most, you know, successful jiu-jitsu teams on the planet. Whereas that doesn't really, you know, again, if you go to a normal combat sport, you know, like if you learn wrestling in high school from a wrestling coach, that wrestling coach will be using the same methodology that an Olympic wrestling coach will be using. He may not be as experienced, he may not be as good, but it's roughly the same methodology because there's a pretty well-developed system. The same thing exists with judo. You know, again, like if you were to go take a you know, coaching from a tennis coach, he's going to be using a lot of the same methods that elite level tennis coaches will use. Again, they won't be as good at it, but it's roughly the same method. Whereas we've got so few elite coaches in jiu-jitsu that the average person who's getting coaching in jiu-jitsu, you know, from a black belt is just getting some guy who is using completely antiquated, almost like borderline useless coaching methodology. And so that, like, all I'm doing with some of the concepts, alignment being the main one, and the emphasis basically being on how do we take a human being with no knowledge of grappling and give them an understanding of what they need to be doing with their own body then give them an understanding of what they need to be doing to affect somebody else's body so that you can control them and submit them. And there are, a handful of concepts. Alignment is the main one, because without that, everything kind of falls apart. But then we also talk about frames, levers, and wedges. We'll talk about momentum and center of gravity, just understanding basic physics, understanding things like timing. And once you understand those things, and once you understand that jiu-jitsu it's not a collection of moves. It's a collection of movements. It's certain skill sets that all elite practitioners use that most schools don't teach either at all or don't teach unless you're an active high-level competitor. And so again, just understanding what it is we need to focus on to actually be good at something is quite lacking in the world of jiu-jitsu, and I'm just trying to contribute to it being a little bit more widespread.
It's a fantastic answer, because when I started watching your material, I actually began to understand jiu-jitsu on a sort of deeper level, because initially when I started training, it was, pull them into guard, then do a scissor sweep, then take mount, then, and it just didn't seem to be a logical way of learning. But when I actually started listening to your material, especially the BJJ formula you did with Stefan, it kind of was mind blowing to me. It was like an operating system for jiu-jitsu, where the moves were various programs, where it didn't matter really what guard it was on, because you could then look for the lever, you could then look to manipulate where you could put a wedge in, you could how to build a frame. And it just blew my mind, because I never even been taught that sort of thing. Why do you think that's not a kind of standard approach? Why are we taught the movement? Is this because most people learn through the repetition of movement patterns, or is that the belief, do you think? Or is it that most coaches aren't trained in this kind of understanding?
Well, it's a little of both. So I have this saying, and I don't remember where I got it from, but it's inertia is the most powerful force in human affairs. And basically, it just means that, like, the way that things are done tend to stay the way that they're done, right? Like, and so the what I referred to earlier is like, the coaching methodologies that have been developed in combat sports and how they were arrived at. They were arrived at by virtue of the nature of a sport that is taken to a very high level is very different than the nature of a hobby that is presented to the general public. And what we suffer from in jiu-jitsu is the fact that most people who own jiu-jitsu schools are not in the business of training athletes. They're in the business of selling a hobby to the general public. And it takes a lot of time and effort to become a good coach. And the market payoff is, at this stage, fairly minimal, because jiu-jitsu has been going through incredible growth as a global entity, as a hobby for people. The supply of jiu-jitsu instruction is not enough to keep up with the demand. Basically, anybody outside of major markets, like obviously if you're in New York or LA or probably London or wherever, in certain big cities, this supply is starting to get saturated. But overall, on a global scale, there are still plenty of places you can go where there isn't even a black belt available to teach, let alone like a good black belt, let alone a good black belt who's invested themselves in coaching. So the majority of people who run jiu-jitsu academies are not professional coaches. They are people who did jiu-jitsu as a hobby. They want to continue to do jiu-jitsu as a profession. They're not going to be able to do so as a competitor. The amount of people who can make a living as a jiu-jitsu competitor is still vanishingly small. So if you want to make a living in jiu-jitsu, you're going to do it by opening a school. And at this stage, because there's still not enough saturation in the market for people to demand really high quality instruction, I would say that the inertia that is creating the problem is the fact that jiu-jitsu is a business more so than a sport. And as long as the business side is more heavily weighted, you're going to have people who don't really need to be good at coaching because there aren't other good coaches in their area that are raising the level that are going to force them to compete. So you're better off as the owner of a jiu-jitsu club investing your time in, sleazy used car salesman marketing tactics, and appealing to kids parents and having a big kids program rather than trying to figure out what is the best way to teach. So the only people that are doing the figuring out of what's the best way to teach are the elite coaches of the sport. And even some of those, frankly, there isn't a ton of pressure just yet, because the amount of coaches at the elite of the sport that are really trying to use cutting edge pedagogy and sports science and all that, there still aren't a ton of them, although it's growing. Like, we're definitely in a phase where the level of coaching has just increased dramatically, I'd say, over the last 10 years or so. There are more excellent coaches now than ever, but they're still the minority in the sport, which means that they're a vanishing minority in the overall jiu-jitsu sphere. So yeah, like I don't think there's a lot of market pressure yet. It'll happen, like it's just a matter of time. But you can definitely at this point be a just dog shit coach and still be a successful jiu-jitsu business owner. And I think that inertia is what's driving it.
It's really quite sad, isn't it? Because I was just listening to that just now, thinking, yeah, I know quite a few coaches like that where it's you kind of have the lion's share of students. So why would you change your plan, or why would you do differently? Because you've got that market, and it's a real shame that people don't want to feel motivated to then go and learn and to develop themselves further. But why are they going to bother if they've got the money coming in? If they can, for the less work, why are they going to go to try push to that next level? Excuse the horrible pun. But something that I was blown away by was when I started sort of understanding your material, I started to see roles in jiu-jitsu matches, or thinking back to situations I struggled with, and it was almost became like there was no longer an opponent. It was more a case of there's a lever, or there's an area to put a wedge in. It was almost like they became I think on the BJJ Models podcast they mentioned about looking at it as a skeleton with areas to put frames, levers, and that sort of thing in. Is that a good way of looking at it? It doesn't matter who the opponent is. There's always something to kind of manipulate, fill, maneuver, lift, if you get what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually something that I actually try to convey to people, especially at the beginning of someone's training, because jiu-jitsu is a little bit weird. And I mean, I guess any combat sport is kind of weird in that people, and when I say people, it's almost exclusively guys. Guys think that they are just going to be good at it because it's fighting. I often say that all guys think they're good at three things: it's driving, fighting, and fucking, and they're wrong about all three, because all of those things are skills that need to be developed. And we look at, and I'll often use tennis analogies here, but like we would look at showing up for a tennis class and expecting to be able to beat the tennis coach as the height of stupidity. Nobody shows up for a tennis class when they're a beginner at tennis and just think, man, if I just lose my shit, if I just rage really hard, I'll be able to beat that guy at tennis. But people believe that about jiu-jitsu. People really believe that if they just try hard enough, they'll be able to win a fight despite not having any like combat skills. And so when we get into teaching beginners, I mean, one, we try to weed out people that are that like aggressively stupid that they believe that, and just not let them train. But even despite that, even despite people understanding on a cognitive level that they're not supposed to be good at this, they very much view rolling or sparring as fighting, and they get very emotionally invested in the idea that they have lost, the other person has won, or they've won and the other person has lost. And that approach, it lacks clarity, and it lacks just kind of a mental equilibrium that you need to have to be effective. If you're way too invested in the winning and losing and all that, then you're just not going to be effective. So approaching the whole scenario as just, there are movements that are going to be exchanged. If a technique is effective against you, it's not that you lost. It's just that, like, a good way to look at it is jiu-jitsu always wins. The better jiu-jitsu will always win. And in any given moment, one of the participants will be channeling better jiu-jitsu. And just depersonalizing it in that way, and only looking at it as it's a lever, it's a frame, there's a a rotational control being applied, there's posture being broken, there's base being affected. If you just kind of depersonalize it, it can make the analysis in the moment a lot clearer. Now, that does ignore, to a certain degree, a level of like gamesmanship and game theory that can apply between two competitors. So there, like, once you start to get into the really high level of competition where everyone knows the moves, it's rare that you'll see people get surprised by something new. It can come down to psyching someone out and bluffing and things like that, but that's much more a higher order competition thing. When you're just training, when you're trying to develop, when you're trying to see what's happening, it's extraordinarily beneficial to just look at it as a depersonalized series of movements and know that, like, regardless of how good somebody is, it's impossible to take away or to eliminate all options. And it's just your job to find the option, to find the lever, to find the flaw in someone's base or their alignment or whatever. And seeing it that way, like, and that's really my goal. Like, the fact that you're able to view jiu-jitsu through a more comprehensive lens than you were before viewing my material, that's the highest order compliment that I can receive, because that's my ultimate ambition in jiu-jitsu, in life, is to take this understanding that most people have of jiu-jitsu, which is really substandard, it's really poor, and elevate it to the point where a blue belt is viewing jiu-jitsu conceptually the same way that a lot of black belts do. And that, like, the fact that that's possible is really gratifying.
Yeah, because it was weird. It was like when I watched the first, I think it was just the first course concepts you and Stefan did on the BJJ formula.
Yep.
And I was like, it opened, that kind of, like, the lights and doors opened and went, sort of like the buzzers went off and, like, you've hit the next level. And it's just like, I actually understood things I never kind of gathered, and why, base wasn't just sitting back on your heels and trying to be heavy, why posture actually mattered, or what you were looking to change the alignment of somebody's spine, where you were trying to prevent them from doing it to you, and there was that sort of mini battle. And then you mentioned a concept of, like, the mini goals, where it's a fight for an underhook, or it's a fight to get into a certain position, but then from that position, it's another competition, and that's idea of many kind of competitions. So it's not just whoever gets tapped loses. It was like, who wins to that position, who wins to that position. I had never thought of that, because I'd always thought, oh, I'm getting my ass kicked here, oh, I had a bad roll, and I'd sulk. When I started listening to that, I was thinking, yeah, I was doing well up to that point. Then I got caught. Okay, now I need to work on this section. And I could then understand, oh, I could have used his leg there as a lever to flip him or whatever, And it really kind of, I'm only just getting into it, and it kind of blew me away. And I was thinking, like, how did that concept of looking at things as mini battles come about? And could you give an example of how somebody could use alignment, levers, wedges, like, say, passing a guard or a submission, for example?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I was heavily influenced by Ryan Hall. Ryan Hall is probably the first well-known conceptual instructor in jiu-jitsu. So I tried to take ideas that he presented and run with them in developing my teaching system and just my system for learning jiu-jitsu. So I always say that, like, half my job is teaching jiu-jitsu, the other half is teaching people how to learn jiu-jitsu. So as far as all those little mini battles, those are at some point, I think, were self-evident. I don't actually remember where I kind of keyed in on that particular notion, although it's quite possible that it's something else that I got from Ryan Hall. When one of the reasons that I started to emphasize it is it's almost exactly as you mentioned, which is when beginners come in, their entire self-esteem is based around the tap. It's like, if I got tapped, I lost. If I tapped someone, I won. And for a beginner, the road to actually tapping someone can be a very long one. Like, it's quite possible for someone to do jiu-jitsu for 6 months without ever tapping an opponent in a regular role. And if that's the case, then you just went 6 months without having a single win. And it's pretty tough for a human being to have that level of lack of success and still pursue something. So by breaking everything down into the constituent battles, we give the opportunity for even beginners to have success. And I explain this to everybody before their first class. We have an intro where we go over, the alignment stuff, the base posture structure, the frames and levers, and we also go through training mentality. And training mentality is so important because, unless you're a dedicated professional athlete, you're doing this as a hobby. If you don't enjoy it, you're not going to stick with it. So the ability to recognize those incremental battles and know that even as a beginner, just the act of recognizing that somebody has affected your posture by grabbing your head and you grabbing their wrist and accessing a lever and pulling their arm off of your head is a victory. So that is the example. It can be literally as simple as that. Is you are approaching someone's guard, you're trying to pass, they grab the back of your head or they grab your collar, and they are now accessing your spine as a lever. And you recognizing that that is a bad thing, because in jiu-jitsu, we want to deny people access to levers. We want to access levers on their body. So you recognizing that is a win in and of itself. Even if you're not able to break that lever control, even if you're not able to access a lever on their body, which is, usually will be at the hand or the wrist, and break the grip, whether it's at the collar or in the back of your neck. The fact that you knew to do it, and the fact that you tried to address that range battle and you knew enough to do so is a win, even if the other person is either so powerful or so skillful that you weren't able to get rid of that grip, and they still were effective in applying an off-balancing movement and sweeping you. You still, within that exchange, experienced the victory of understanding what you needed to do. And that has a motivational power that I think many people are severely lacking in their training. They tend to, as you say, like, I was just getting my ass kicked for the first 6 months. Well, yeah, I mean, we all do, but there are still small victories that, if you learn to recognize them, can be very motivational, because it's just a matter of, like, when you're rolling against somebody who's a superior artist to you, you're going to lose most of the battles. Your job is just to recognize the battles, attempt to do the right things, and force the other person to take more steps to beat you. And every time you do that, you're winning, because you're developing. Because that's all the reason we're showing up to train is to develop. If you're showing up to train to win, then you're kind of an idiot, because training doesn't really involve winning on any level. It's just development. Winning happens in competition. It happens, in different scenarios, whether it's jiu-jitsu competition or MMA competition. Winning can certainly happen if you get into a street altercation where, surviving and going home to your family is the win. If you're in a profession where you have to use jiu-jitsu to control people, then doing that effectively is a win. So yes, there's absolutely winning, but the notion of winning by subduing your opponent in training is a false one. The win is your development, and you making somebody else take more steps is a clear win. And so that's both from a technical level of being able to recognize what the battles are and that you need to engage in them and how to engage in them. That's a win. But then also on a personal motivational level, being able to recognize what you're doing and being able to measure your own development through that is also a huge win.
I wish I'd found your stuff when I was a white belt. Honestly, every roll was like a competition, and I used to sulk for ages afterwards, thinking, "Oh, I should have done this," and "Oh, he only got the tap because of that." And I think that's a big problem we have, especially as guys, is that ego into it. It's the, we tend to find any excuse rather than just going, "Yeah, I'm learning," and try to be open and honest. And I had come back from a leg injury just before the lockdown, and I can remember feeling like I hit a plateau. Like, we were getting taught these moves, and there was no chain to it. There's no understanding of how to go from that position to that position, or why we go to do that. And it just felt like it was just these arbitrary, like, movement patterns just for the sake of learning it, to take it off a list, and I really kind of struggled with that concept. But how can we do this, utilize these kind of concepts when we're drilling, when we're in clubs where, they have these set plans like Gracie Barra or ATOS or these sort of things, things that we can't just work on our own kind of concepts or have an illuminated, if that's the best way of putting it, coach like yourself.
That's honestly the most difficult question. Like that's the $64,000 question. We have at our club a visiting student program. It's on hold right now due to COVID, but prior to the lockdowns happening and all that, we would host, let's say, between 50 and 80 people a year to our academy from all around the world.
I was interested, coming myself.
Yeah, and please do, like once everything gets back to normal, I'm really looking forward to hosting people again, because like for people who aren't familiar with it, it's a free program. Anyone from any academy around the world can come to our academy, which is on Vancouver Island in British Columbia, Canada. So all they have to do is get here, and all they have to do is contact me and secure a spot, and then all they got to do is get here, and we will host them for free at my place. I've got extra bedrooms in my home. This place has been a frat house at times. We've had as many as 5 or 6 people staying with us, and they train for free for a week at our academy. And so the process of hosting these people and giving them access to our training methods, live and in person, almost inevitably leads to the question of like, okay, now I'm going back to my home academy where it's a regular curriculum or random moves or whatever. How do I keep applying some of the stuff that I've learned? And that's it's a very difficult question to answer, because unless you have access to a like-minded training partner with whom to perform some of the drills, some of the fuck your jiu-jitsu rounds that we do, some of the like the focused rolling, having the ability to really go through like trying to understand and recognize the concepts mid-roll, recording your rolls and then going back and watching them. A lot of people aren't okay with somebody recording a roll. So you basically, if you don't have access to a dedicated training partner who's following the same program that you are, it can be quite difficult. Like you basically are left with this sort of like guerrilla approach where you're going to go into your roles with your training partners with sort of hidden with a hidden agenda, and that doesn't mean that it's nefarious. It's just that, like, if they don't know what fuck your jiu-jitsu is and they don't know what you're doing, it might seem like you're being kind of a dick. Like I know I've certainly I've visited academies where I will go into a role with a very specific goal of letting the other person try to do certain things so that I can respond. And then if I achieve the goal, I reset and I go back again. And it takes a little while for them to clue in what I'm doing. And sometimes when they do, they're actually a little bit offended. Like if I'm trying to pass someone's guard, and as soon as I do, I go right back and I start again, they like, if it's not properly communicated, and even if it is communicated, sometimes people can get a little bit salty about it. These people tend to have a bad attitude, but which is engendered by the form of training that most people go through, which is every role is a war, and how dare you just easily do this and then go again. But yeah, the process of applying this is very much one of using intelligent focused training. It's using every role as an opportunity to experience as many movements as possible. Right. So like the big thing that I advocate, which a lot of people find strange, is that beginners at my academy are not allowed to close their guard. And what that does is it eliminates the 5-minute roll where people just sit in closed guard, death gripping it with their ankles crossed as hard as they can, not letting the other person move. That is an unproductive roll. You literally spend 5 minutes where neither participant gets much better at jiu-jitsu, especially at the beginner level. So when you're trying to figure out how to do this stuff in a gym where you don't have access to the methodology, that's pretty much the only thing you can do, is go into your roles and have very specific goals. And as a beginner, that can be very difficult because you're not able to dictate the pace of a roll. As a black belt, it's easy for me to go, if I'm at another academy and I grab a purple belt and I'm working on whatever I want, I can do it because I can take the roll in any direction that I want. and I can find something to work on no matter what happens. So even if I can't take it in the direction that I want, if it's going in a different direction, I can work on whatever direction we're going in because I've got a diverse enough skill set. As a white belt, if you don't have skills in certain areas, it's unproductive to be going through an area where you have no intelligent idea of what to do. You're just flailing about. So like, I wish I had a better answer other than try to find a dedicated partner or get good enough that you can steer the direction of roles and work on very specific things, because that's kind of the only answer we found so far.
I mean, because, well, the answer that had sort of come up with in my own head was to you could still look at the stuff you were learning, but look at it under your concept. So, like where they say, like, move the leg up to tip them onto their back or something, you could say, well, that's actually utilizing that lever, and then I'm, changing their alignment. They could maybe understand.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah, no, but that's what I mean when I say, like, you have to try to focus on whichever area of the role you can control and recognize what's happening. So you can absolutely you can still develop the mental understanding of what's happening in a role, even if you can't control it. So like, absolutely, when you if you watch the core concepts and you start recognizing what frames and levers are, then even if somebody is just having their way with you in a role, you can still be creating that mental checklist of, yep, they accessed the lever there. Oh, yeah, look, my frame failed. Oh, they broke my posture. Oh, they're like, you can recognize that. But at a certain point, and it doesn't take very long, you're going to be good enough to do that. You're going to understand jiu-jitsu that, like, okay, I'm getting my ass kicked and I know exactly why, but there's nothing I can do about it because my training partner is too much better than me right now, and I'm not able to affect any of the movements that would be required to stop what they're doing. So absolutely at the beginning, just recognizing what the concepts are at play during every stage of the role can be done regardless of what your training partner is doing and regardless of your skill level. Absolutely, that's a really good point.
Because I used to have a training partner, a great guy called Ryan, and we would go through it and it'd be a case of, okay, this week you're not allowed to use your favorite submission. So when I first started, I was key locking everybody left, right, and center because I was a big guy.
Yep.
And then he said, right, you're not allowed to use that. So then I had to go away and find something else. And I think it was the north-south choke I started using and hitting people all over the place with. And they said, right, you're not allowed to use those two. So I then had to go and find out, my arm bars suck, so I had to develop that. And I found that was a great way of doing it. Or, you're not allowed using your favorite guard, or you have to pass without using pressure passing or something, which was a big thing for me. So I loved that kind of idea. So maybe that's a kind of way around it. But he's coming back now after the COVID situation sort of hopefully loosens up soon. For people listening who are maybe finding your concepts while we can't train, have you found something that we can do? Because the mental aspect of just running through stuff in my head using your concepts makes me understand this in a lot deeper level. But what else would you be wanting your students to do? People who maybe kind of visit. Is it just conditioning and strength stuff? Or can we take this in a deeper level using the concepts and the sort of operating system you use?
Oh, no, absolutely. I gave a talk for the BJJ Online Summit during the lockdown where I addressed how people can improve without having access to training. And the first part of it was just recognizing what the alignment concept is and how you can understand it in your own body and in other people's bodies. The best way to do it when you don't have access to training is just to watch match video. The level of understanding that you can gain from watching high level black belts compete and seeing how these concepts apply at such an elite level it's incredibly valuable. And the ability to watch roles and break them down on a conceptual level will then make your own training it'll enhance your own training, because if you are able to record your roles and then go back and watch them, that's a just incredible tool for development, right? Like on BJJ Concepts, we have a section called rolling analysis where myself or Rory, who's my partner on the site, will break down a roll. Sometimes we're breaking down a really famous roll between two high-level competitors. Sometimes it's just a roll that's happening in the gym between myself and someone else. Sometimes it's me competing. Sometimes we do breakdowns for our subscribers where they'll send in a video and we'll break down one of their rolls. So having that as a skill is just going to make your overall understanding of jiu-jitsu better, which will make your actual rolling better when you get back to it. It's really important to recognize that, like when we think of jiu-jitsu as a skill, that's a really it's a way too simplistic version of what we're talking about. When we're trying to develop skills, every subset of anything that we do in jiu-jitsu is a skill. So if we're talking about our ability to roll in an exploratory fashion in the gym with an eye towards development, that by itself is a skill. There are plenty of people who are, quite good at jiu-jitsu from having trained for half a decade or more, but they're not actually very good at getting better at jiu-jitsu. They're good because they've put in an insane amount of hours and they're gifted athletes, but their ability to implement new skills is actually quite poor. There are a lot of really experienced black belts that have very limited games, and they're not doing a good job of expanding their game because while they might be good at the overall skill of grappling, they're not good at the skill of training in a way to maximize development. So even something as simple as just I'm going to roll is a skill that must be subdivided into various like derivations, and that skill needs to be cultivated. So the skill of watching video and being able to analyze it is a different skill. The skill of watching a match in real time when one of your students or one of your teammates are competing and being able to give them instruction, so like basically cornering or coaching in real time, is another skill. And it's one that most jiu-jitsu instructors are also quite terrible at, because it doesn't matter how good you are at jiu-jitsu if you don't have the ability to recognize what someone's doing and what the opportunities and pitfalls are while they're doing it in the moment, and then give them concise instruction in the moment. Like I said, that's a difficult skill. Teaching a group class is a different skill than teaching a private class, which is a different skill than teaching a seminar, which is a different skill than teaching to a camera. So like there's so much within the world of jiu-jitsu, both as a student, as a competitor, and then as an instructor, as a gym owner. There's so many things we can develop to enhance ourselves as practitioners, as individuals. And I mean, I'm sure this is just universal to human endeavor. There, like any activity that we do, there are subsets of that activity that are their own discrete skill, and people tend to view these things as monoliths rather than as something that's known as an Inteliki. An Inteliki is any complex adaptive system that has a bunch of constituent parts, and so like the idea of jiu-jitsu as this monolith where if you're just good at jiu-jitsu, you're good at all parts of jiu-jitsu. It's a gross misunderstanding of how expertise works in any field. So investing time in the mental aspect of understanding jiu-jitsu, investing time in recognizing movements in jiu-jitsu, investing time in calling out movements in jiu-jitsu for the purpose of coaching in a tournament. Like all of these things are subsets, and that's something that we've tried to bring to the online academy, to BJJ Concepts. There's all these different sections where if you want to just work on your basic like fundamental movement patterns in jiu-jitsu, that's what the 101 section is for. And then if you want to work on your instruction, that's what the pedagogy section is for, and that has subsections for developing different parts of how you teach. So yeah, I think any intelligent, focused person who spends a little bit of time on recognizing which subsets of their jiu-jitsu skill are lacking can find a way to develop them, whether it's the physical training or just the mental aspect of it.
It's time for a quick break. There are millions of potential products to buy, so how do you know which ones are worth your hard-earned money? Simple. You go to nextlevelguy.com/affiliates and explore those that will transform and improve your life. You'll find deals, listener exclusives, and special offers with some great companies. Recommendations are 100% honest and only on items Ian has tried or believes in. The companies showcased will make you a better man in all areas of your life. Simply go to nextlevelguy.com/affiliates and level up.
I love that because you were the first one to discuss it at that kind of level. Like, because I've always looked at like my job, for example. 'Cause I work full time in addition to this, and I looked at like the subset of how I was dealing with somebody. But like, was it the confrontational side of it? When I had to step up and tell them that no, they were not getting the extension they asked for, or the how I was dealing with people by email, the way the language I was using. I kind of like I broke it further and further down. And as I kind of looked into this, I thought fixing a wee bit here, and then putting it back into the analysis and seeing the effect it had, and I was like, okay. And I started trying to look at jiu-jitsu in that sense of if I worked on this or blocked off access to my favorite tool here, how would that then affect my role? Or if I went in and played my worst guard, how would that then affect my training or my understanding of X? And it definitely works. And I think that's the problem, though, is we're stuck with these kind of, like these groups. Let's say, no, our jiu-jitsu is the best version of jiu-jitsu. No, you're not allowed to deviate from it. And you kind of have to do that with a training partner in a sense. And it's a real shame. But you did mention before in another podcast about the philosophy of going from a blue belt to a brown belt in another situation. When you were talking about training with somebody, you were wanting to get them to train up to the best they can in a certain position. Would that be a good way of looking at, of how we improve our jiu-jitsu? Taking these subsets and going from blue belt to brown belt, then picking something else and going blue belt to brown belt, to gradually build it up from the smaller stepping stone, so to speak?
Yeah, absolutely. Because it doesn't matter how good you are at any subset skill in jiu-jitsu, you're going to be a white belt at something, right? Like I usually give the example of leg locks because that was something that I was kind of an early adopter with leg locks, left it alone for a while, and there was a pretty big revolution in the game that I had to catch up with, and now I'm fairly current with it again. And so like I probably went through the point of going from a white belt to black belt level in leg locks, and then my level changed relative to the best people. And so like people get very insecure about belt rank and what it means, and like I think it's really important for people to understand that all these skills are relative, and having this notion that, oh, I'm a black belt, therefore that means that I shouldn't lose or I shouldn't have to learn this, or that's a really bad trap to fall into. Every position you start out in, you're a white belt in that position. Maybe if you have a really good understanding of the concepts, you can start out as a blue belt in that position. But anytime you're adding something new, you need to have that that beginner's mindset or that growth mindset that if I dedicate some time to this, I'm going to become quite good at it. And believing that you're too good for something, or as you mentioned, having this kind of tribal identity that like, oh, this type of jiu-jitsu is good, or this brand of jiu-jitsu is the best. And like some people talk about old school jiu-jitsu, and then some people talk about self-defense jiu-jitsu, and then some people talk about particular affiliates and their brand of jiu-jitsu. Like no one methodology is going to have all of the answers, because it's impossible for any one coach to have such a breadth and depth of knowledge that they can make you good in all situations. It's really important to be open to learning from multiple sources. Like I've got an affiliation that I belong to, but I learn from everybody. I definitely I've kind of made my career on going out and training with the best and trying to distill what they did into this conceptual vernacular that I have. Like that's aside from the concepts that I teach, being able to take cutting edge information in the sport and breaking it down into the language that we use is something else that people find really helpful. So if I wasn't open to going out and learning from everybody, if I had any kind of tribal association with this is the best and I can't look at that, and that would really subvert any ambitions that I would have to do what I've done. And so I think regardless of your level of experience, taking that approach is going to be immensely beneficial.
Because something that I was very interested in asking was, You had talked on another episode of a podcast where it was about the the distance you are away from everywhere and how you had to sort of learn a lot of the training stuff that you wanted to. You had to become great at all aspects of your jiu-jitsu because you didn't have the ability just to have another coach to come in and teach that sort of thing. So you kind of, it was like the distance, how it affected your coaching and how you've set up your sort of philosophy of your brand, so to speak. But also with these students coming in from different training places, do you think that's helped you then learn and evolve and become a better coach, but also kind of take a bit of this person's jiu-jitsu, a bit of this brand's jiu-jitsu, and kind of build your own like unique hybrid system from it? And then using your concepts, you've kind of been able to teach it on a grander scale.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the design of the visiting student program was partially based around that notion. Is that so? Like on the one hand, because of the relative geographic isolation here, I didn't have access to a multitude of high-level training partners, especially at the beginning. That like there wasn't anything handy for high-level people to roll with. So I tried to take as many of my students and develop within them skill sets in individual positions. Like I said, going from somebody being a white belt to a blue belt to a purple belt in that position, and then utilizing their skill in that position as an opportunity to battle them in their best position was my way of pursuing my own training. And then the visiting student program is another way of diversifying the just the different skill sets and movement patterns that you're going to see in the room. Like as much as I might try to teach people a variety of different skills, there are always going to be things that other people from other schools do that we just don't do very much. So part of the ambition with the visiting student program is to share, but the benefit of it is also to receive, right? So the visitors that have come through have absolutely like they've paid a huge dividend to my students. In that, like generally speaking, most of the people who visit aren't they're not high level competitors. They're not super high ranked. Although we have had people like that visit, but generally speaking, they're not really going to contribute to my jujitsu. And like I say that with all humility. But what they have done is benefited my students. They like seeing different movements, being able to respond to techniques that people don't utilize very often at my academy has been immensely beneficial. For me, it's more like I took it upon myself to travel to experience, elite level practitioners and try to benefit from training with them in terms of my jiu-jitsu being changed by experiencing movements that I don't get to see at home very often. So I would say that the visiting student program stuff has been more for my students than for myself. But anytime you can take yourself outside of a closed environment, it's going to be beneficial. Like the complaint that I have in my area is that, although that's slowly changing, is that most of the schools on the island are quite isolated. They don't go out and train with very many people outside of their own school or their own lineage. They're pretty insular, and so they develop something that we call inbred jiu-jitsu. Right? If all you ever do is train with your own students in your own school, you're going to have huge blind spots and limitations, especially if you don't have a conceptual approach to jiu-jitsu. If you just have I learn these techniques and I'm only good at dealing with the techniques that I face in training all the time, that's going to be severely limiting. So the combination of traveling to train with elite people, of having visitors come from all over the place and getting exposed to what they do with their games, and having the opportunity to use the concepts that I teach to adapt on the fly to different styles. All of that has contributed to making like creating a grappling methodology that it's immensely enjoyable. It's not often that I can go into a roll and just feel totally flummoxed. Even when rolling with really good people, like I'll lose because if somebody is more experienced and better at jiu-jitsu than I am, especially if they're a better athlete and they're younger and stronger and fitter and all that than I am, I'm going to lose ultimately. I won't be as effective in the entire role as they will be, but I will have success in ways that I wouldn't have if I didn't have this conceptual understanding, if I wasn't able to deconstruct things. When I roll with really good practitioners, I'm able to understand the role and take things away from the role because of the conceptual analysis that I wouldn't be able to do otherwise. And I just know from experience, having learned the sort of classic way and rolling with people and losing and not knowing why and being extremely frustrated with it. And now, if I go through a role and I'm not able to be effective with certain movements, I know exactly why I'm not able to be effective with those movements. So yeah, like it's just incredibly important to have a framework for understanding jiu-jitsu, and then take that framework, and whether it's through visitors, whether it's through travel, whether it's through just going to open mats, and if you're in a city where you've got a good diversity of schools and there are a lot of open mats you can go to and you can be exposed to different people, you don't have to go far from home, you don't have to have a visiting student program. Most people, if they're in a big city, there are a variety of open mats they can go to where they will experience this, especially if you're not inclined to compete. The best way to experience, like somebody coming after you with stuff that you don't know, is to go out and compete, because it involves a level of immediacy and a level of let's just danger that doesn't exist in roles in the gym. But if you're not inclined to do that, then going to open mats and experiencing that is probably the best way to do it.
Like, a lot of people went through when COVID really hit and said, that's it, we're shutting down. I'll give you a free instructional. So everybody kind of collected, 5 or 6 instructionals. Now, you're probably going to hate this question, but can you use your concepts, the look, the analysis that we talked about earlier on? Can we pick up Gordon Ryan's passing strategy, Marcelo Garcia's, guard on this section? Can we pick up Stefan's rear naked choke or something like that? Can we incorporate different parts or understand these things on a deeper level, do you think? Or is it best just to watch them and go, okay, I'll try that move?
Oh no, definitely. So I get a lot of emails or like messages on Instagram from people who have purchased whether it's the BJJ formula, the original product that I did with Stefan, or BJJ Concepts, which is my online academy. Anyone who's gone through my sort of core concepts material, they will message me and they'll say that their ability to like take in or consume instructionals has changed because of the language that we use and the way that they're now able to understand jiu-jitsu. They're able to watch an instructional, and for one, they're able to better recognize when some instructionals are dog shit and when they're not. I have had quite a few emails of people like those. They'll send me a link to a YouTube video advertising some instructional, like, man, before I saw your material, I think this kind of stuff was great. Now I know not to bother. So, but when it comes to consuming the really quality instructionals, there's definitely an added factor of having a background in understanding jiu-jitsu conceptually. Just it makes taking on new information easier, because when you understand when you understand the constituent parts of something, building something with those constituent parts is just easier. So taking one building block, which is the information in an instructional, and adding it to your game just becomes easier when you understand it conceptually. So yes, absolutely. Like I think I touched on that a little bit in that talk that I did for the BJJ Online Summit. But absolutely, if you've got instructionals that, like, I know people have taken an instructional and kind of put it on the shelf, and they've watched some of the stuff that I put out, and then they can actually go back and watch someone else's instructional and have a different view on it, which is it's really cool. So yeah, absolutely. Like, a good quality instructional will, I watch instructionals. We're in a really fortunate time in our sport where you do have access to the best people in our sport putting out good information. Sometimes the best people in our sport, even though they're putting out good information, aren't necessarily the best communicators. And some athletes do inevitably suffer from something that's known as miscalibrated explanatory insight, which is it's a psychological phenomenon that exists, and it's been pretty well studied. It exists for elite athletes where they they're doing a movement, but they don't understand exactly how they're doing a movement. So their way of describing how they do the movement is not actually accurate. And again, this I usually apply the tennis example, because when this was studied, they actually used the tennis player and they had him explain his serve motion, and then they had him perform the serve motion and broke it down on video, and they used the video analysis, and his terminology did not accurately describe the serve motion. And so the term miscalibrated explanatory insight is just that. They're trying to explain something, but because they lack the necessary insight into what they're doing, they're not able to explain it as well. And so I've had people message me about how they watched somebody else's instructional, and even though that instructional didn't give them enough insight into how the movement worked because of the explanation, the fact that they were able to recognize the rotational control and the end of the lever and all of the stuff that we talk about, they were able to still derive the correct answer, the correct methodology from just watching the person do it, and kind of deduce it from that movement, and less so from their actual explanation. So I think, if you're willing to put the time in to understand something on a deeper level, the benefits will be, again, if we want to add to that sort of skill tree, watching instructionals and deciphering them can be a skill that you can be adding, and that will benefit your jiu-jitsu as well.
Because I've seen something like that where they've said to top performers, describe what you're doing, and say, like the tennis serve, for example, and then they've said to somebody else, read that and then try to mimic it, and they've gone completely awry, because the little thing that the star performer doesn't even know they're doing or doesn't pay attention to is maybe the one thing, like the way they shift their weight, or how they rotate themselves or invert or whatever it is. And it is amazing how you don't know the best thing you're doing. You don't pick up. It's just natural, and that's the beauty of jiu-jitsu, is that is open to your interpretation of it. You can create your own kind of brand of it, because I've come from a Gracie Barra gym where they would say things like, okay, now we should all be starting from this position, and this is the part, this is where you should go to in every row. And I thought, that works for small guys, mobile guys, fast guys, not for big lurch guys like me, lurch out the Adams family kind of thing. I'm better suited in another position, but I felt like it was all kind of cookie cutter. This is what we were taught, that's the way to do it. And I think that's why a lot of people struggle with it, is you try to mimic Gordon Ryan when you should be mimicking Craig Jones, or when I came to Stefan and yourself, I was like, these guys get it. They're not. You're not just forcing us down your chosen path. You're giving us actual the ways to do it without adding a sort of a brand on the back of our arse, juicy and all these kind of shitty things do.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, I think that jiu-jitsu, one of the great things about it is because it's so diverse in the movement pathways that can work even at the highest levels. I don't think there are too many combat sports where that's possible. Obviously there's a bit of diversity in how people will box or how people will wrestle, but I think it's a lot more diminished. The ways that you can succeed in jiu-jitsu are myriad, and because of that, I think jiu-jitsu is unique amongst combat sports as a vehicle for self-expression. You can find a game that fits your body type and personality and disposition in so many different ways, and trying to shoehorn people into some sort of cookie cutter version of somebody else's jiu-jitsu, I don't think is super beneficial. So and then that's again another area where understanding really what jiu-jitsu is, that it's not movements and you do this move and that's the best way and that's the only way. Understanding optimal movement patterns and understanding that there are multiple ways to get the job done it's huge, because our ultimate goal as a Western civilization is to create individual freedom and liberty for the people involved, and maximize that freedom for the people involved. And I think that at its highest expression, that's what jiu-jitsu should be. It's a it's a way of expressing your individuality.
What would you want a coach to have? You know, like say if somebody's sitting there just now and they're going to go back to their jiu-jitsu in 2, 3, 5 years or whatever, however this COVID thing's going to go on for, what would you want them to be doing in the meantime? Now, would this be in terms of things like visualization, journaling? Would you want them to be mentally going through movements? Would you be wanting them to be reading to kind of open their mind on the cognitive behavior, like their best learning styles? Would you want them to be just doing some miles on the road, or doing some weight training, or is there anything we can do to become better away from the mats in this sort of troublesome time?
That honestly depends on how long you're looking at being away from the mats. I tend to think that, although there are a few places in the world where gyms have been closed probably since March and still are. We're in the middle. Yeah, like we're in the middle of September right now, so we're looking at 6 months in. But I think that's the minority. Like most places that have got COVID somewhat under control, gyms have reopened usually within about 3 months. And in some places that don't have it under control, they're still just open regardless. So, for better or worse, right? So it's just kind of it's a difficult question to answer without knowing the timeline in advance. Like if what I would do if I knew I had to be off the mats for a year is different than what I would do if I knew I had to be off the mats for 2 or 3 months. Any of the things that you suggested, I think, would be helpful. Certainly fitness, if like any amount of time, if you're healthy and you're not rolling, you should be working on your fitness. That's just a given. Again, depending on how long you're going to be away from the mats, visualization is great. Visualization is phenomenal for competition. So when we talk about that, we can maybe get into it more. So I'd say maybe let's try to table that for like short-term, long-term, and intermediate-term like competition goals when we talk more about competing next time.
What books and what happened when you were younger where you started to really understand this? Was there a point where you thought, what attracted you to the science aspect of it, the analysis, the trying to understand it on a deeper level, the physics side of it, or how did your sort of learning approach to this allow you to think, I can do something with this, and I'm really good at teaching and explaining and coaching and things like that?
Well, I actually had a really interesting experience when I was quite young. I was a Taekwondo student at the time. And so I think I was 15, and I was one of the higher ranked students, and I guess I had covered a few classes here and there. And I had students come to me afterwards, and they told me that they were understanding the material better when I taught the class. And I was 15 at the time, so like just to give you an idea of how long ago this was. But they had mentioned, like a few students had mentioned, they understood the material better when I was presenting it, and I didn't have anywhere near the kinds of exposure to proper coaching methods. I think I was just a relatively gifted communicator. I've always loved the English language. From a young age, like I used to read encyclopedias as a child. I had a dictionary in my bathroom, so I would sit down and study words while I was taking a shit. It was it's funny when you see when you start pulling at the threads of your life, where those threads take you. And I'm sure if I hadn't had those formative experiences, I wouldn't have pursued becoming a martial arts teacher, which is why I'm so aware of how much work it takes to arrive at this this teaching methodology independently. It was a lifetime of study. It was being interested in science, being interested in I read almost exclusively nonfiction and have for a long time. Although I don't have as much time to read now that I'm a business owner, but prior to opening my school, I would read extensively, usually a book or two a week. and most of it is science of one kind or another. So, like, I'm still, I would say, a complete dilettante when it comes to actual science, but I'm fairly well versed in what the methodology is and how it can be applied to life. And it's the people that I respect the most are the people that are unflinching in their view on arriving at truth. They recognize that they do not hold the key to anything other than a method of arriving at the truth. And there's a wonderful story that Richard Dawkins tells about a symposium where I can't remember which branch of science it was on, but there's a presenter there, and he basically either debunked or presented new information. And there was another attendee at the symposium who had spent a lifetime on this theory, and that theory was effectively debunked by this other presenter. And the guy who had had his life's work turned upside down by this new information went up to the guy who had turned his life upside down and thanked him. He's like, thank you for showing me the truth. And those are the people that I respect the most. Somebody who can honestly and unflinchingly change course because of new information, because they're not so beholden to a particular approach. They just want to get at the truth. That's why I'm so just melancholy these days about the state of the world and about the sort of individuals that we're dealing with, because the level to which people have just embraced absolutely unscientific thinking and anti-intellectualism just guarantees that these sorts of things will not happen as much anymore, and people aren't willing to just turn around and change their mind on something because they don't care about the evidence, because they don't care about the truth, because they believe that their team has the truth, and they're too personally invested in their identity to ever change. So yeah, it's been a lifetime of study and of trying to get at better answers and changing methodology when better answers arrive that's led to this for me.
Because that's the thing, is like science is almost coming from the approach that we want you to tell us we're wrong. We want to find out. We have an idea of a hypothesis in mind, but we don't stick to that or find evidence that supports that. We then look and say, can this stand up in a double-blind placebo test? Can this stand up if we Jimmy across the water does the test? Is the same data going to come back? And it's tested repeatedly, and it's almost like, if we do find something that doesn't work, we go, okay, and then we come up with a new analysis from that. Whereas I think people are just now, it's again tied up to your ego, tied up to your understanding of the world, and it scares people to think they're wrong, to ask for other people's opinions. You're never going to get that nowadays of somebody debunking somebody without it being fake news or some other bullshit claim. And it's sad, because that's how we learned. Oh, I think this is the best way of learning how to ride my bike. Oh, I fell off. Oh, somebody, my big brother showed me how to cycle. Right. That explains why I fell off, because I went too low around the cattle grid or something like that, And it's I think we're missing that. And do you think that's where a lot of jiu-jitsu new beginners go wrong? Is they come with a very, I'm a big, strong guy, I'm going to smash that girl, or I'm fast, so I should only look at fast guys. They don't look at outside kind of.
Yeah, I think getting your identity tied up in any particular thing can be harmful. So yeah, like if your identity is that I'm a tough guy, jiu-jitsu is going to suck for you. If when you get subbed by a 120-pound girl, that's going to be a bad day for you. Whereas if you're viewing it through a scientific lens, it's going to be a great day, because you will have conducted an experiment, and the experiment that you just conducted proved to you that jiu-jitsu works. And isn't that why you're here? Isn't that why you decided to take it? Like if you could show up and take a martial art and be able to beat experienced practitioners of that martial art within a few weeks or a few months, then why would you take that martial art? the answer is that you're trying to get an identity gratification, an ego gratification, and I think that's it's a failing testament to our society and our educational systems that people seek knowledge for the sake of identity gratification rather than for the sake of knowledge, rather for the sake of arriving at truth. And so, that's why you see this prevalence of cult thinking in U.S. politics, in politics around the world in general, in conspiracy theories, and that people aren't seeking knowledge for the sake of knowledge. They're seeking knowledge for the sake of emotional comfort. And there's no way that real knowledge and science can compete in the realm of emotional comfort with conspiracy theories, with tribal political thinking, with tribal religious thinking, because all of those, frankly, horribly flawed ways of perceiving the world, because that's all those things are. All those methods of perceiving the world are just they're deeply flawed. They're just they're unarguably wrong, but they provide intense emotional comfort. And so there's just science doesn't provide emotional comfort. All it provides is we're going to get the answer. You may not like the answer. So when you want to like the answer, you're going to run towards there's a global cabal of people that are controlling the world. Whether it's QAnon and the global ring of pedophiles, or whether it's the flat Earth and people are every single human being involved in science and transportation in every way is in on the conspiracy. Whatever it is, as stupid as it is, emotionally weak people derive comfort from knowing that someone is in control. Whether it's Allah or Yahweh or Zeus or the Illuminati, it makes them feel better to know that there's a plan. It's the speech that the Joker gave in The Dark Knight. It's like, as long as there's a plan, people are okay. And that's why people gravitate to these sorts of insane ways of thinking, because it's emotionally comforting. So there's no way for the hard reality revealed by science to compete with the milk bottle of comfort afforded to emotionally weak people by conspiracy thinking. So in that sense, as far as those kinds of people are concerned, we're doomed. We're never going to reach them. We just have to create a new generation of individuals that are emotionally stronger because they've been educated to the scientific method, and they know that regardless of what happens, at least they'll be able to arrive at the right answers.
Something I was really impressed with was you had a really unfortunate fire at your academy. Where did you find the sort of strength to get back into it? And what did that teach you about that? The damage to your property. What did it kind of? Because a lot of people that would have ruined them, but you seem to have actually come back stronger with a deeper understanding and stuff like that. But what did you learn from that unfortunate incident about you as a person, about the community that you're in and that sort of thing? Because you have a great local community.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because I think that with situations like that, people are going to be more inclined to heap praise upon themselves for how they reacted. And I don't know that there was any other way that I could have reacted. Bottom line is, I got a phone call that the place had not burnt down, but there was a big fire, and we wouldn't have access to our training space, and I had to find us a new place to train. That's it. It was just, okay, now let's find a temporary place to train, and then let's find a new location and build a new academy. It was literally you do what you have to do in the situation. It was compounded by the fact that in the same week, I actually found out that my mom was diagnosed with cancer. And so if anything, it was the worst week of my life by far. If anything, being able to focus on rebuilding an academy gave me a really useful distraction from driving my mom to the hospital for cancer treatment. It just wasn't that bad. It was difficult in terms of the workload, because I was pulling probably 14, 16-hour days, just like, waking up and, trying to build a new facility. I had to fire my my contractor and take over the like the general contracting, so that I wasn't doing the work, but I was hiring. Like I had to fire my general contractor, so I had to go and like purchase equipment and deliver it to the site, and hire trades and deal with city hall and do all that shit. And then I would have to go and teach the classes at the temporary location, and then so like I just didn't have a minute to myself. You just you set down the goals and you do them. I think that's the real answer there. I don't think that I had time to sit down and like muster up some great like reserve of willpower or anything. It was just, there's a task in front of you and you do it.
I suppose that kind of links back to your approach. Like you're saying, it's like science doesn't gives you the answers. You don't have to like them, but it's the truth. And it's like, did you have somewhere to train? No. Do you need to find somewhere? Yes. And then you kind of just take the emotion out of it and just deal with it. And I suppose you could reflect later on to it. Because
I know I've been in situations where something unfortunate has happened, and there hasn't been a course of action that I could take. I just have to wait. I have to wait for an answer. I have to wait for someone else to do something. Like in situations like that, I am horrible. I hate it. The lack of control is very difficult. I don't want to sit there and wait for someone else to do something. I want to take action. So a situation like that, if like it was, like I said, it was emotionally draining and it was physically very taxing and very difficult, but there wasn't anything other than to just do it. And like there was, I will say this: if somebody had told me going into it how much of a pain in the ass it was going to be dealing with the city bureaucracy, I probably would have just closed up shop and gone and moved somewhere else and just either opened a school somewhere else or tried to get a job teaching for someone else. The in terms of the frustrating kind of like Kafka-esque Byzantine labyrinth of dealing with local just government requirements, which by the way wasn't even all that difficult. I can only imagine what it would have been when it comes to like a really bad experience with a government bureaucracy. Mine was probably pretty tame by comparison, but even still, it was so intolerable to me that if I had known going in what it would have been like, I don't think I would have done it. So there was definitely some fortitude that I had to draw on to deal with the uncertainty of having my life in somebody else's hands, somebody who was not inclined to be, even somewhat helpful. Although there were people in that department there were other people that were almost actively against small business and just wanting to be as horrible as possible to you in throughout the process. So I guess I'll say, like, if there was if I felt there was a choice on giving up, I may have done so if I had known going into it just what the process was going to be like.
Because I would hate that. Because back then especially, I hated not being in control and not being like somebody leading something. Because I remember when I had 3 grandparents die in the same sort of year with different variations of cancer, and I was like, it was seeing somebody almost crumble before you. And I hated that, not being able to do anything or feel like I could do something. And I think only now with jiu-jitsu, I've kind of understood just being there and talking to somebody, or just being there, it lets you kind of, I don't know, it's helped me express emotion better because I don't bottle things up as much because I physically let it out. And, it's all these amazing benefits of jiu-jitsu, and it's surprising how it helps you in that kind of situation without even realizing that's the core bit of it. It's.
Oh, I'm sure that my response to the fire and all that stuff was informed by the experience of training jiu-jitsu. That like without a doubt. I don't know how much it did, so I don't like to speculate on stuff like that because, like I said, I think it's really easy to be too self-congratulatory about, I went through a difficult time and I came out on the other end of it. How much it was my previous experience in life, prior to jiu-jitsu, how much it was jiu-jitsu, how much it was me waking up in the morning and being like, okay, we're going to get through this no matter what. I don't know. And so I don't want to speculate too much. I think that if you just decide that you're the sort of person that gets things done, you're going to be the sort of person that gets things done. It really is. That's like, I've gotten a lot of compliments throughout my life on being an individual that has discipline and fortitude and all that kind of stuff. And people ask how I arrive at it. And I always, like, if I'm going to give advice about it, that is the advice that I give, is just decide that that's the sort of person that you're going to be, because identity is so pernicious in so many ways. You know, as we kind of talked about when it comes to politics or religion, or just being unwilling to take in new information despite it being demonstrably true. That if you recognize the power of identity, you can use it for, you know, nefarious purposes, or you can use it for really beneficial, powerful purposes. So if you forge an identity around being the sort of person that does what they say they're going to do and gets things done, then you're going to have a really powerful tool, because it'll be so anathematic to your identity to give up, to just to let go of a situation. You'll find a way through it if that's the sort of person you've decided to be.
What would you want people listening to take from this? You know, is it a takeaway message from the philosophy side of jiu-jitsu and kind of learning and the understanding of it?
I mean, it would just be that jiu-jitsu is kind of like science, in that it should be a quest for truth. And if you let that be how you pursue your jiu-jitsu, and you let that be how you pursue your life, you might not always be happy, but you will always have the tools to deal with reality in a way that is beneficial, rather than hiding your head in the sand.
Well, that's it for another week, and thank you for listening. It's now time to take what you've learned and use it to develop and enhance your life with the key points mentioned. Listen, try it, embrace it, use it, and crush it. Now's your time to hit that next level in your life. If you liked this episode, then please leave a comment on the show notes or a review of the show on your podcast platform. Everything helps evolve the show. Until next week, keep seeking the next level in your life.